I deleted some of them and added some others. So I want to present myself and just explain who I am. I started to graffiti in the late 90s. So I was in school in 1997, and then in 1999, I made so kind of a small career on the streets doing some graffiti, and we did first bombings on Moscow and St. Petersburg metro. And then in year 2000, I started to do some more site-specific street art. And then I also tried to do some career in galleries, but then I realized it's not something I'm interested in. At the same time, from the very beginning, I was also trying to work on collecting, analyzing art on the streets. And I started to do website on Russian graffiti in 1998. I had internet access, and through this I had an opportunity to also browse on graffiti work and also share some information on what's going on in Moscow at that point. And in 1999, I also made first DIY zine about Moscow graffiti. And also then in 2011, we made a website and a platform called Partizaning, which is in Russian and in English. And last couple of years, we mostly work on, at the same time, working as artists. We also do some research, and we are publishing books on DIY graffiti street art in Russia, and mostly in Russian. And so also I'm a teacher. I'm writing my PhD on Russian street art, and I'm also teaching in a couple universities in Moscow and Vladivostok. But it's more of a hobby because they pay really little in Russian universities, fortunately. And that's why I need to also give some presentations in commute trains, explaining contemporary art and modern art and street art to ordinary people. And so this example of my work when I combining performance arts, street art, and also my educational practice. So it's the abstract of my presentation. So my idea is that basically global street art was instrumentalized by different creations, by market, by city officials, and most of the art we see, it's more of a protest for sale, where I call Works Bank and all these other people who are kind of making something kind of rebellious, but easily sold out for people. And I believe it's not changing anything, while some more nuanced and complicated and context-oriented and local practices can be overshadowed by these big names and beautiful images. And first, I want to say about the periodization of street art. I believe this article by Raphael Schechter is quite important and influential because he's the first one who actually working on this problematization of boundaries of street art. And I believe his periodization is quite working quite good for understanding where we have these borders between street art and other practices. So he's proposing to perceive street as a period from 1998 till 2008, and I believe it's quite he's quite right, because in late 90s, thanks to the internet, people all over the place, all over the world, they had the opportunity not only to perceive information coming from the West and from New York, for example, or Berlin, but also they had an opportunity to speak themselves, and also they kind of got this opportunity to speak, and also they realized they're part of the huge global subculture, and they have to also think about who they are and how they work with the local context. And basically in 2008, we had this situation when globally street art started to commodified and institutionalized, and this exhibition in Tate Modern that Raphael was one of the co-curators was one of the first and biggest steps for these tendencies. And in my research, I'm also working on trying to implement this theory for local scene, in this situation, Russian scene. And this is more of a like a typical perception of street art and graffiti in Russia. And we had 4 decades of this development. In during the Soviet times, we had like a big popularity of breakdancing and also graffiti as well. But then this wave disappeared, and in the late 90s, it was the second wave. And in the late zeros, quite weak, but also developing art market in Russia started to pay attention to graffiti and street art. And my friend Igor Ponosov organized the exhibition Russian Street Art Is Dead, trying to also conceptualize this idea of street art going from streets to art galleries. But because of the financial crisis of 2008 and also the weakness of Russian art, we didn't actually achieve a situation for total commercialization of street art. And then we had a new and very interesting period of street art that was also catalyzed by massive protests. Start with also local version of Occupy, but mostly by Bolotnaya Square protests against Putin. And street artists, they start to really work on finding ways to work with the political context, and also try to combine street art practices with art activism, socially engaged art, performance, etc. But then in 2014, new institutions showed up. The first Moscow Street Art Biennale, and also the Street Art Museum in St. Petersburg. So basically, since then, these tendencies quite kind of, they reached the same level as you have in many of the Western countries. And my question was, what was there before and what's after the street art? And my proposal is to use these terms protest street art and post street art to actually conceptualize and describe different practices. First of all, that we had before street art was a consistent movement, and after the street art was commercialized, and what the main tendencies in this post-street art practices. So protest street art, so considering this periodization, I propose to use this term protest art to describe these practices aesthetically similar to street art, but basically not being part of this consistent movement. And I find different examples of proto-street art in conceptualist works in Moscow and NASA in the late 60s, 70s, and in the early 80s. I believe these examples could be compared to other examples that we've seen yesterday, as Gérald Zlaty-Kamień and Gerald Nägeli and John Fechner and other pioneers of poster art in US. But these people, they didn't actually know about these practices probably, and also it was not a consistent, a big movement. So I believe these separate artists, they found this way to streets because they were not happy with opportunities they had in galleries. But in Soviet times, it was another situation that these artists, they uh, had no opportunities in galleries as well, because you know, we had the Soviet Union, and these non-conformist artists, they had no opportunities to actually exhibit themselves. And in the late 70s, artists started to go in public spaces, but first they actually started to go outside of the city, working in the countryside, organizing, it could be called happenings, or like strange situations. And these collective actions is probably one of the first examples, and it could be described as one of the early examples of proto-street art in the Soviet times. But then we actually can find different examples in the avant-garde and much earlier examples, but uh, we'll start from here. And also authors as Claire Bishop, for example, she find the roots of socially engaged art and dialogical art also in these collective actions in the countryside, in this Soviet art. This example of the early stencil work by SZ Group in the 1980, it's called the Here. Uh, I believe this is the first example of stencil art in the Soviet Union. And these people, they also realize that they don't want to try to exhibit themselves, that they also didn't want to really just be part of the really, really small community of artists. And they wanted to work with ordinary people, passersby. And this step, I believe, is something similar to what street artists did compared to graffiti artists. So basically step out of the subculture towards the working in public space in more dialogical way. A better example is poetry by Dmitry Alexandrovich Prig, who is a Russian conceptualist artist and a poet. And one of my favorite series, actually, like a big book of small poetries written typen on the machine and posted in public spaces. And he did it in the early 80s. And he was even arrested and put in a mental hospital for doing this. But these messages for citizens, it's like an early example of artists trying to create a public space or public sphere outside of their small kitchens and the circles of artists. And these examples of reenactments done by our unofficial educational institution, School for Fool, last summer, when we try to reenact some of these early examples of Russian proto-street art. It's another example. I believe it's a beautiful poetry. I don't know if it's good enough, the translation I did today, but you can read it and see how relevant it is for the street. And obviously it's not related to graffiti, and it couldn't called as street art, because I believe the street art is something that was evolved from graffiti. Another example by Dot Art. These two artists, a couple, they did an interesting participatory work in the year when I was born, actually a couple of months before I was born. They started to work as commandant, I don't know, of a cooperative, basically house where they lived. And instead of properly doing his work, he started to perceive his work as an artistic action. And for example, he organized a subotnik, which is a common Soviet tradition of DIY cleaning but instead of kind of painting it in a normal way colors, they painted the courtyard and all the facilities and the furniture a gold paint. And he was also arrested and put in mental hospital for some time. So we see these examples are quite interesting, and they don't really think about exhibiting themselves, and they try to mimic a real life and also communicate with other people, but also I'm not sure if people really understood what they were doing at that point. Then we had this long tradition of Moscow actionism, Eti group, the text, which is who we dig in the Red Square, and Alexander Brenner first glove his action when he proposed Yeltsin to fight him, and the Pussy Riot. As you see all these examples, they try to attack these symbols of power, the Red Square, and this tradition was quite influential. And I believe in the beginning it didn't really influence the graffiti, but in the late period of development of graffiti, and especially street art, these different movements, they kind of start to influence each other. Then we have obviously graffiti history, and I'm not going to speak too much about this period. But then we also had this, as I told you before, this period of commodification and instrumentalization of street art. You see it's the Cobras painting on the one of the central streets of Moscow. But this example is more unique. It's a Russian hockey player in the military uniform, and it says, we took back what is ours. Obviously, it's about the Crimea. So as you see, we have this different source of powers. It could be market, like money, or different institutions related to beautification of the city, but also Kremlin propaganda. And as we see, different powers, they try to co-opt and use this term graffiti and street art in order to kind of brainwash or just use as tools these kind of techniques. Now let's speak about post-street art. These are practices, they are much diverse and can include urban interventions, as Mathieu described before, spontaneous sculptures, partisaning, probably tactical urbanism, street performances, other also experiments of people, of works done in the galleries, what can be described also as intramural art. And I believe, that most of the examples of what people or media call street art, they could be really called street art because these are murals, and it's more about create beautiful images or make more value, financial value for different districts. And a brilliant example of activists who destroyed this mural by Blue in Kreuzberg. It's a great example of trying to fight this tendency. Or another work by Brad Downey in Italy, in Rome, when he, instead of making mural, he actually spent money for local people to create something like repairment in their houses. And also, I'm searching for different like specifics and what's unique about Russian street art and why it's kind of so isolated. Yes, we've seen a couple of examples of Russian art before on the streets, but I believe it's not critically underrepresented in the West. And also, as a researcher, I have really little opportunities actually to take part in the conference such this. and also here not being able to actually work in this globalized uh, like a dialogue. They have to actually work in with local audience and mostly using Russian language and work dealing with local problems. Yeah, so it's something about my research. It's something I actually already told you. So now I want to show a couple of examples. I don't know if I have enough time. Okay, so Partizaning is our group and also a movement we organized in the like about 10 years ago. It's something similar to tactile organism, but it's coming from different perspective, and it's really bottom-up movement. So here we pretend to be these workers who actually do buffs on the street, but instead we try to repair streets. And then we see interesting dialogue with those official people using orange uniform who actually buffed our DIY zebra crosswalk. So the dialogue is quite interesting, and we see this anti-zebra as an interesting kind of result of dialogue. Another example of this dialogical work we've done is a big project we've done with Shreya. She's Indian, but she spent some time, like a few years, working with us, being part of our collective, and we did lots of works in Moscow and some abroad. These yellow mailboxes we installed all over the place in Moscow, collecting ideas how to make cities better. But it's similar to kind of crowdsource, but in a really low-tech way. These are different mails we received. Basically, we've got like hundreds of mails, and then we try to implement them by building connection between acts and independent municipal deputies. Another example of dialogical work by Zip Group when they work in a courtyard in Nizhny Novgorod. It's like a big topic to discuss this unique Nizhny Novgorod street art scene. It's work by feminist group Gandhi, who did interesting works on feminism and also these underrepresented people on the streets. For example, is immigrant workers from Asia who actually mostly working on buffing our pictures on the streets. Another unknown word, this Budka, booth by Mark Rothko. Kirill Kto, he's also working with this idea of buffs, but in a more colorful way. Also another related interesting movement called Jacques Art. It's a big movement by just ordinary people who try to fight neglectedness of different courtyards, but also utilization of courtyards in Moscow. They use old tires and old different toys to create crazy sculptures, and you can find them everywhere in Russia. And artists like Brett Downey or Deva, Berlin-based artists who we invited for different festivals in Moscow. They were influenced by these examples, and they created similar works in Moscow and Kazan. And I think it's still one of the last pictures. Another thing which is quite unique about Russian street art or post-street art is logocentrism. Like most of the key authors in Russia, they work with text, and they also kind of self-reflecting, and they try to find their way, and it's just another interesting reflection on what street art and modern graffiti done by St. Petersburg-based Maxim Ima. Yes, thank you. Here are my contacts. You can contact me if you want, and I think I need to stop sharing my screen now. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for applauses. thank you so much for your presentation. It was very comprehensive of a trajectory of a specific branch of intervention. So lots of comments here on the chat also. Some of the pictures were related with debuffing. Of course, it's always there, debuffing. I don't know if someone has some specific question to make. Okay, I have Uli, and Uli can go first, and then sorry, what's your name? Okay, Shiria, the second. Can be? Yeah? Uli, go.
So thank you, Make. That was very interesting because I never really heard much about Russian early street art. Like I'm not so much the Raphael Shakhter fan about this period thing. He was not the first to state that, and it's a highly questionable concept. But I was very happy to see this early stencil example from the SZ group, and I wonder, is there like a book about early Russian street art, or do you have maybe a kind of link, or where did you get the information, or could you type it in the chat in the original Russian transcription, so I could do more research on this SZ group who did this here stencil, and did they do more stenciling at that time? Do you know anything about them?
Okay, this part of Russian conceptualism, Moscow conceptualism, is quite overshadowed by first wave of Moscow conceptualism, and these examples they're not well known, and I found them kind of by chance on one of the presentations, and then I had to actually interview all these artists. So I have interviews, and I have some links and publications, but they're all separate. And if you're interested in this, we can be in touch on Facebook or emails, and I can try to send you some of the details.
That sounds very interesting.
So this artist from SZ, Vladimir Zakharov, he lives in maybe in Berlin. So he immigrated some time ago. So if you're interested, I can also give you some context of him as well.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Shreya. You have your sound off, Shreya?
Sorry. I was asking my question.
It's okay.
It was really awesome, firstly, to see examples of street art from like a non-hegemonic area. Like Russian street art is just super incredible, and these examples were really great. But my question is, even when we have these examples of conceptual art and political kind of street art, what is the risk at which your personal expression becomes co-opted as propaganda, especially in countries where I think maybe technology and tools of graffiti and expression are less democratized? I would say Russia is one example, and I would definitely say India is another example, where like sometimes you see a mural or you see a piece of street art and then you wonder like, wow, that was really cool, but like, I wonder who did it and why. So that, yeah, how do you separate or reconcile the idea of propaganda with street art?
I use Vyacheslav Morozov's concept of Russia as subaltern empire. And according to this concept, Russia should be considered as a country which is, on the one hand, is colonizing its own territory, but on the other hand, being colonized by the West. And I believe art is one of the most influential tools to colonize different regions and do some certain propaganda. And I don't know, I think most of the arts can be considered as propaganda, but some propaganda can be really creepy, and it can be done in a really horrible way. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's kind of matching your own views, sometimes something against your views. And I think I'm interested in street art, analyzing street art through like sociology and politology, trying to see how people fight for power or independence through art. And I believe it's like a really big topic to discuss, and it's not quite clear. Maybe it's in India it's much easier to analyze what's going through this post-colonial lens, but in Russia it's even more problematic. I don't know if I'm responding to a question or sharing their thoughts I have, but it's really hard to actually express myself in this. It's quite complicated, and I need some more time to express these things. And via internet, it's even more complicated, and in English. So yeah. Okay.
We'll discuss later.
Yeah.
We can take one or two more, Isabel. Yeah.
Hi, well, thank you. I have a very, very specific and maybe childish question. It's regarding the traditional and very common scribble and drawing of male genitalia that we can find in Europe and United States and in many other countries. I have heard that in Russia, it's not a tradition at all to draw the male genitals. It is a tradition to write the word instead. Is that a thing?
The word instead of picture.
Yeah. Is that true? This is what I have heard.
I'm not sure. There's a big case, ongoing case right now. One of the artists, she drew some genitals, women genitals, and then she was arrested for a reason. And it's a massive campaign, ongoing campaign in Russia and in other countries to support this artist. I don't remember exactly what his name, maybe Yana, or I need to Google it. So basically, we have this crazy right-wing turn since Crimea 2014, and like liberals and opposition, they fight against these anti-feminist, anti-LGBT and queer tendencies, and anything could happen now. I mean, it's kind of all crazy, and it's all mostly happening in the public sphere. It's not about like massive repressions, but as you see, they kind of try to arrest certain people for, I don't know, for drawing genitals or for justifying rainbow. There's another example of deputies. They like in a serious level, they propose to prohibit rainbow as a symbol, and they compare it to swastika. So yeah, and I don't know if it's I believe it's not, they sometimes call it like a traditional turn or a turn to traditions, but there's nothing such this in Russian traditions, and we had really progressive legislation and traditions in the early Soviet times, and before that it wasn't that really clear, but when they kind of justify their crazy ideas by turning to some traditions, I believe they're building new traditions, and it's quite postmodern, but not pre-modern. If I correctly understood your question.
Yeah, I didn't know that there was any connection with censorship or politics, or I thought it was just like a tradition, like the tradition of writing the term instead of like drawing the term. I hadn't like drew the connection with the with a potential censorship or anything like that. I thought it was just another way of expressing the same idea, I guess.
Oh, yeah, maybe another thing that the Russian tradition is quite logocentric. So basically, if you like people write hui, the dig, or like different other words on the walls, it's a long tradition of writing saying on the walls, and these are mostly texts. So, and the Russian street art and post-street art and before proto-street art, it's mostly logocentric. And maybe what you are asking, yes, so people kind of, they tend to write instead of draw. It's typical for Russian culture.
Mm-hmm.